In the last couple of years, you might have noticed a bit of a trend going on your social media feeds. Abandoned Japanese houses, also known as Akiya, going for next to nothing, and people absolutely losing their minds over them. And honestly, who wouldn't? Because owning your own house in Japan for cheap does sound incredibly appealing. Now, I've actually been following this space for quite a while and genuinely do enjoy some of the content people are putting out about it. But there is always something in the back of my mind poking around that makes me feel like a lot of the videos I'm watching about this subject are essentially just ads. So I decided to look into this myself, and I quickly found out how big the gap is in reality between what these videos are telling you and what it would be like for you to actually purchase some of these properties, let alone renovate it. Now, as we all know, Japan does suffer from a depopulation problem. In fact, one of the worst in the developed world, and it's a problem that's been going on for quite literally decades at this point. The Japanese population at large has long been below replacement rate, and that means there simply just isn't enough young Japanese people to go and occupy all of these houses. And the young Japanese that actually do exist are moving towards the cities and not staying in their more rural villages and hometowns. And that's leaving these rural towns and villages even further behind. Over time, older residents simply pass away, and entire towns are left with houses that are essentially empty and abandoned, just because there is nobody left to maintain or live in them. And once that happens, they are simply left to decay. And those are then known as Akiya, essentially vacant abandoned homes. And the scale of how much this has been occurring for the past decades is actually really staggering. We're actually not just talking about a handful of houses. Japan quite literally has millions of these. And considering outside of Tokyo and a few other larger major cities, Japan is effectively still shrinking, which means that the supply of these houses is only going to keep growing in the future. Now, the free house concept that you've probably seen online, that actually is real and it does exist. And there are actually entire government-run databases to keep track of these abandoned houses, known as Akiya banks. That's basically where local governments will go ahead and list these abandoned properties, and sometimes for free or very cheap, specifically to attract buyers. And more than likely, a lot of the content you've been seeing online is directly sourced from these banks. But what is worth noting about all of this is that the best ones are often snapped up instantly, primarily by Japanese developers. So what is available to you as a foreigner is basically whatever is left. And usually you will find there is a reason why a particular property has not already been bought. And yes, while some of these properties may essentially be free, free does not always mean what you think it does. On all of these houses, you would still owe property taxes. And in quite a lot of cases, the structure of the house is in such a poor condition that the value is actually negative. Also, demolition in Japan is notoriously expensive, even more so in rural places where labor is scarce and waste disposal laws are strict. And just getting rid of the old building materials alone can run into the tens of thousands. Even the properties that might be worth saving often come with serious structural question marks. Old foundations, essentially non-existent building codes, and in a country that deals with earthquakes and natural disasters regularly, that is an actual cause for concern. There's also an interesting cultural dimension to why so many of these sit empty rather than hit the market. A lot of Japanese families are emotionally attached to these properties, or the inheritance situation is complicated enough that nobody can agree to sell. Over time, that reluctance is exactly what leads them into the state of decay you see in your content. And just to tie this together for anyone wondering why this is even relevant to foreigners, Japan actually has very few restrictions on foreign property ownership, meaning you essentially have the same rights as a Japanese buyer when it comes to purchasing one of these. That's the entire thing that makes this whole conversation possible, and it's something that does surprise a lot of people. Now, all of this wouldn't be as much of a phenomenon if there wasn't as big of a content machine behind it. And make no mistake, there absolutely is a content machine. Creators like Shu Matsuo Post and Anton in Japan have built their entire channels around this, and genuinely, their content is good. I've been watching these guys for a while, and I enjoy their content. But scroll into their bios and you'll find that most of them are directly selling a service, acting as a buyer's agent, essentially helping foreigners navigate the purchase process for a commission. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but that does mean that they are incentivized to make the whole process look as easy and pain-free as possible. possible, because they are directly financially incentivized to make the whole thing look as quick and easy as possible. And to be fair, the earlier content within the space was quite different. It was a lot more of just scrappy builders and dreamers documenting their actual process of buying and renovating one of these places, showing the real labor and the difficulty behind it, warts and all, very much from a builder's perspective. But as the concept grew and the audience grew with it, something shifted in the style of content. It became less about what actually happens post-purchase and more about selling you the possibility of one day making it happen for yourself. Less, here's what I actually went through, and more, imagine if you had this too. And there's a pretty clear analogy here. It stopped feeling like a home renovation channel and started feeling a lot more like a real estate pitch. And once you see it that way, the rest starts to make a whole lot more sense, because that's exactly when the bios started filling up with links, videos started ending with mentions of websites and consultations, thumbnails grew a whole lot more polished, and titles got more aspirational. Now, the content did not stop being entertaining, but the core of what it was fundamentally changed. So let's actually start to look at the numbers behind all of this, because once you do, the picture does start to change pretty quickly. Renovation costs on these properties are almost always significantly higher than people expect going in. And that's before you factor in getting rid of old building materials in Japan, especially in rural areas, is genuinely expensive due to strict waste disposal laws. We're talking potentially around 1 million yen, sometimes more, just in demolition, clearance, and waste removal before you even started rebuilding. And if the property is remote, difficult to access, or has older hazardous materials like asbestos, the bill goes up fast. And labor costs in these rural areas are high precisely because there simply isn't much of it. The same depopulation problem that created the Akiya also means that there aren't many tradespeople left to do the work. Then there is the location problem. And this one is really hard to overstate. These properties are almost always in the middle of nowhere, far from trains, grocery stores, hospitals, or any real amenities, which isn't just a lifestyle issue. It also means rental yields are essentially non-existent because nobody wants to rent there either. That's of course partially why the house is abandoned in the first place. But even if the finances worked out, and for most people they don't, there's still the question of how long you can actually stay there. Japan does not have an easy visa pathway for foreigners outside of employment or marriage. But there are two routes that get talked about in Akiya circles. The first one is the business manager visa. You essentially set up your own Japanese company and self-sponsor your way in. That does, however, require a physical registered office address you'll be paying for whether you use it or not, and at least one full-time employee, as well as roughly 5 million yen in capital investments, and of course Japanese legal support, because there is no way through that paperwork as a foreigner without it. The second is the Designated Activities Long Stay Visa, essentially a visa for wealthy individuals, which require you to demonstrate savings of around 30 million yen, roughly 200,000 US dollars. And allows you to stay for up to a year. The catch with that is that it's strictly for leisure. No working, no remote work, no running your Airbnb from abroad. You're legally just a long stay tourist. So you're either building and staffing a Japanese company, or you're parking 200 grand in savings and agreeing not to work. Neither of which is what the content typically leads with when it's showing you a house with a 0 on the price tag. By the time you add it all up, you're potentially looking at several $100,000 additionally, on top of a house that was supposedly free. And it's worth noting that the business manager visa route didn't just get more expensive by accident. The capital requirement actually jumped from 5 million yen to 30 million yen, precisely because the old rules were seen as too lenient, and the route was coming under political scrutiny for making it too easy for foreigners to establish residency through a company. Whether that trend continues is worth keeping an eye on. So let's talk about who all of this actually makes sense for, because it's not nobody. it's just a very slim subset of people. If you're approaching this as a property investor looking for rental yield, the comparison to other major cities is not flattering. Manhattan sits around 2 to 3% gross, central London is similar, and Tokyo comes in around 4%. A rural Akiya, the rental market is essentially non-existent. The one genuine exception is tourist destination properties, Niseko or Hakuba, where international visitor demand actually drives strong seasonal yields. But those properties aren't sitting in any Akiya bank going for next to nothing. If it's a desirable location with real demand, it's already been snapped up. And if you're thinking, okay, but what if I just Airbnb it when I'm not there? Well, Japan actually has a specific law against that called Minpaku law, and it caps short-term rentals at 180 days per year nationally. Local municipalities can and do impose even stricter rules on top of that, meaning in some areas you're looking at weekends only or specific seasons only. You'd also need a license as well as a registered management company if you're not on site, which as a foreigner living abroad, you won't be. And the regulations have been tightening, not loosening, so that escape hatch is more complicated than it looks. And then there is the stay problem. Even if the numbers somehow work, most foreigners can only be in Japan for 90 days visa-free. And as we've covered, the business manager visa route just got significantly more expensive. So you're paying for renovating and maintaining a property you can only visit a few weeks a year. So who does this actually make sense for? Honestly, someone for whom none of that matters. Someone with enough money that the housing being free was never really the point anyway. Someone who wants their own little piece of rural Japan. A vacation home, a personal project, a dream they can afford to just have, and generally doesn't care about there being any return to it. And look, that's a completely valid reason to do something. If money is no object and that's the dream, it's a pretty cool dream to have. So after all of that, who is this actually for? Not property investors, the yields don't justify it, and the location kills any realistic rental demand. Not someone looking for a visa pathway into Japan. That route just got dramatically more expensive and is under increasing political scrutiny. And not really someone who wants to spend a significant time in Japan every year, because legally, you just can't. Here's the real irony of all of it though. The person this actually works for is exactly the person whom all this free Japanese house thing was never really the point for in the first place. The dream of owning a quiet piece of rural Japan existed long before any of them picked up a camera. They just built a business around it, and as long as they're being genuine with their audience and fully informing them of what's involved, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. What I will say is that the window for this being as appealing as it currently is for foreigners may genuinely be closing. Between visa routes tightening and the shifting political climate around foreign ownership in Japan, this is not getting any easier. So if you were ever thinking about actually doing something like this, doing it now is probably going to be a lot more realistic than 5 years from now. Just make sure you're talking to an actual Japanese property lawyer before you talk to anyone who is going to sell you a dream. But honestly, even after all of this, if I had the spare cash, I would probably still do it all myself. Well, anyways, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, consider hitting the like button and subscribing. It genuinely does help out a lot. See you in the next video.